Good morning, or afternoon, or whatever it is where you are. Today, I'd like to talk to you about not despising small things. So many times we think we can't do as much as somebody else, or we don't have the same gifts or the same talents. We have things that we can do, but they don't seem big and they don't seem bold. And therefore, we kind of discount them as being able to do anything for the Lord. We think, well, yes, I can do this a little bit, but I'm not really good at it. So can God use that? The answer is yes, He can. Whatever talents or gifts or possessions or skills or whatever that God has given us, they are valuable and they can be used. It doesn't matter how small they are. It doesn't matter how good we think we are at them or not. What matters is that we are willing and faithful to use those things for God's glory. So today I want to talk about not despising small things. Let's start with Zechariah 4:10. It says, "For who hath despised the day of small things?" This question was posed to Israel because they were not thinking that the things that they were doing, particularly in regards to rebuilding the temple, they were thinking that it wasn't as good as it used to be, or it wasn't as good as it could be, or the progress seemed so slow because it was just one stone at a time. But that's how progress happens. One small stone at a time. You don't put up a whole wall at one time. It's one little stone, and each of us can be that little stone. We can each use our little stones that God has given us. And in that, we can use them for His honor and for His glory. And ultimately, we can accomplish great things, or I should say, He can accomplish great things through us. But we have to be willing to be faithful and to use those things that He's given us. Like this passage says, we have to not despise the small things, whether it's a small gift or a small skill or a small talent or a small amount of money or a small person. It doesn't matter. It can be used for God's glory, and we have to get that in our heads so that we can be faithful to His calling for our lives, because whether we believe it or not, each of us can make a difference in His kingdom if we're just willing to be used. So today I want to talk to you. There's a whole bunch of examples of this in the Bible. I mean, a whole bunch. I can't go through all of them today, but I want to go through just a few examples of small people who had small gifts that were used in mighty, mighty ways. Okay, you ready? We're going to start in John 6, and we're going to talk about a little act of generosity. A little act of generosity. John chapter 6 tells us about the feeding of the 5,000. This story is actually in all four of the Gospels, which tells you how important it is. But I want to look at John because it talks about the little boy who brought his lunch. And we're going to look at just a few verses. Like, I can't read the whole thing because of time. But I want to look at verses 5 through 13, okay? The people have gathered, and it's time to eat, and they're hungry. And the disciples just want to send them home. The disciples are like, we can't feed all these people. Let's just send them home. But Jesus has another plan. And He tells the disciples, just wait, sit them down. Let's see what we're going to do. So let's read John 6, verses 5 through 13. When Jesus then lifted up His eyes and saw a great company come unto Him, He saith unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? And this He said to prove Him, for He Himself knew what He would do. Philip answered Him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. One of His disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto Him, There is a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? And Jesus said, Make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, And when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. So we see this account where it didn't seem like they had enough. Well, I mean, at first they didn't think they had anything. And then Philip says, well, we have a little bit of money, but it's not enough to buy the people enough food to have just a little bit. And then another of the disciples steps forward and says, well, there's a little lad here, and he has some bread and 2 little fishes. Notice how the word little keeps coming up. Because they have it in their mind that it's too little. It's not enough to make a difference. One little boy, one little meal. It's not enough to make a difference in their minds and in their eyes. But Jesus says, oh, I can work with that. And he sits the people down, passes the food out, passes the food out, passes the food out, and it just keeps going and going and going to the point where everybody eats all they can eat. They're full. They can't eat anymore. And then Jesus sends the disciples back out to gather up the leftovers. Yes, there were leftovers. That little bit that the disciples didn't think was enough, Jesus made not only feed all of those people, but there was enough left over, 12 baskets full to be exact. And I think that's because there were 12 disciples, and each one of them had a basket to go with them. That's just my idea, but that's how much was left over out of what the disciples thought was not enough. If we are willing to give of ourselves and of what we have to others, like this boy generously gave his lunch, if we would give of ourselves and be generous like this little boy, just imagine what the Lord could do with our little bit. How many other people could be blessed because we were willing to give what we had? Even if it's a little bit, even if we don't think it's enough, even if we don't think it's good enough or sufficient enough or polished enough, maybe. It doesn't matter. If we give it, he can do just like he did with this little boy and multiply it to bless not just the little boy and the disciples and himself, but everybody that was there. So many people were blessed from one little boy with one little lunch.